Hello, everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3, on Channel 9, and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I am delighted to welcome Dinah Cardin of the Peabody Essex Museum here this morning to talk about their brand new walking tour of the Salem Witch Trials. Dinah is a content producer at Peabody Essex Museum. She produces and hosts the museum's award-winning podcast series, The Pemcast, and she's also producer and co-host of Pem Walks from the museum's historic properties. She edits the museum's blog, and she just produced the walking tour that she's here to talk about today about the Salem Witch Trials. Dinah has worked as a journalist, a professor, and she was the founding editor of Art Throb magazine. Dinah, hello and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Thanks, Mary. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here. I just took the walking tour myself last week. I want everybody to know that the streets of Salem are once again navigable because it's after Halloween. And I'm curious to find out, Dinah, what gave you the idea to put together this new walking tour?
Well, we came together, several departments at the museum, and said, you know, we have such a wonderful collection of objects that were owned in the 17th century by the accusers and the accused, and we have documents over 500 on loan from the Massachusetts Supreme Court with the original handwriting. These are the trial documents. So not everything is on view, but we do have things on view in different parts of the museum, and people come through the front door and say, I don't care about anything but the Salem Witch Trials objects. In October, that's sort of where their heads are. And so we said we definitely wanted to help them and find a way to do this. So there are all these tours all over Salem all the time, and you can't help but run into them on the streets. And we said, wait a minute, we have these, experts, our curators who have cared for these objects for so long. And so the tour really is our curators giving you the knowledge behind each of these objects, the history, how we take care of them, and how these objects are in relation to other objects in the museum. And so it's really incredible. And then we go outside to 6 key sites, and you can take the tour on your own, using your phone and your headset, and you don't necessarily have to be in big crowds, which is nice.
Which is really nice, yeah. And of course, people think Salem, and they think witch trials. And I'm curious to find out, Dinah, given that you've been so engaged with the Witch Trials Walking Tour, I'm sure you've been giving some thought to this question, but why do you think the witch trials continue to just captivate people's imagination? They were a long time ago.
Well, if you live in Salem, you ask yourself that question almost daily. You see people in pointy hats in, March walking down the street. And try to make the connection of what they're thinking and what brought them to town. But Dan Lipkin, who's our head librarian, says on the tour, one of the things is just that there's still so much we don't know. It was so long ago. It's still so shrouded in mystery. You can't just go on TikTok and learn more about the Salem Witch Trials and see that actual history unfolding. So there is a lot, even though we have these documents in the trials, there's a lot that we don't know. So I think that's part of it. I also think part of it is everyone sees it through their own lens. There's a renewed interest throughout time, and people are sort of associating it with what's going on in that moment. For many now, that moment is what's happening with women being oppressed, and there are people fighting in the streets right now, as we know, in countries trying to get beyond the oppression of women in this country with our own reproductive rights. And what's gone on recently with that, I think that people can't help but draw those parallels.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right about that. And that's an interesting way to put it, that each historical era that passes brings a new relevance of different kinds, depending on what's happening at the moment. And certainly, I think for me, the upsurge in conspiracy theories today has also made the Salem witch trials seem, all too sadly, strangely, absolutely relevant. So I wanted to ask you, the tour begins with stops inside the museum, and the first stop is the Native American Gallery, which may surprise some people. But please tell us about what makes this gallery an important and illuminating frame and foundation for all the subsequent exhibits.
Yeah, at Penn, we sort of recently merged the American and Native American collections into one gallery, and they are in conversation with one another. And as we know, history is layered, and while one thing is happening, another thing is also happening. It's not just that timeline that maybe you see in elementary school that this happened and this happened. Many things were happening at once in the 17th century. And so it's a reminder when we see these objects that feel sometimes very English, like a chair made in England, on the tour and in the gallery, when we see that next to objects made by indigenous people. So then we know sort of all these things were happening at once. It's a reminder to us that America was not America yet in 1692, and that these were colonists, and that these people were living side by side with the Native Americans, sometimes not so peacefully. And there were, wars taking place to the north of Salem at that time, and lots of things going on between the colonists, the English, the French, the Native Americans. And so it reminds us of all of that was all happening in that moment. It was a very complicated time as this country, or as these colonists were trying to find their footing in a shaping Massachusetts Bay Colony and eventual country.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. You mentioned how our history is often taught, what we remember from elementary school. It's a very, very simplified version. There were the Pilgrims and they had Thanksgiving dinner, and yet it was very complex. And there were a lot of shifting alliances among different groups. The British weren't the only immigrants here. There were Dutch, there were French. There were a lot of different Native American groups that had conflicts amongst themselves. And so I think it's really helpful, I think, with the opening in that gallery to put that historical context in place, because it shifts the way you think about what was happening and the amount of fear, especially, and paranoia, perhaps even, among the immigrants who were in a brand new land that they were trying to learn how to navigate. Well, Peabody Essex has, as you were talking about, some just extraordinary historical artifacts dating from the actual witch trials. So could you tell us about some of the objects and documents that are on display, especially some of the ones that you, Dinah, find most compelling or impactful?
Yeah, there's an object that one of the curators told me this wonderful story as we were doing the tour, and it just I just said, oh, we have to include this. And it is a bundle of sticks wrapped in like a little string or like twine looking thing. And it was kind of recently discovered in one of our historic houses. So the 17th century John Ward house that some people confuse with the witch house, because it's first period architecture, but this was discovered. And what we know about research has told us that this bundle of sticks would have been considered a poppet, which some people think of as a doll, but actually it would have been used as a protective device. So protection against what? Well, it's back to what you're saying. When you've got a lack of trust among people and you've got fear as a driving force, and you also have, it gives us a window into the mindset of these people who remember these settlers came from the British Isles and what they brought with them in terms of their thinking, magic is real. I could put a spell on my neighbor. Perhaps their cat does have some powers. All these things that they might have been using this protective device to protect themselves from, and that sets the stage again. Not only is there political rife going on, but there's also this layer of how these people thought all of these things could possibly be real.
Yeah, it's that had an impact on me. That's in the Salem Stories gallery, and it's such an interesting story that it was found, inside the house much after the fact. But to look at it, and to us, it just looks like a little bundle of sticks, but it had magical properties for the people who owned it. And to me, that's part of the engagement of the walking tour, because you're looking at something that is, from our present point of view, it's just an object. But then you have to kind of back away from it and use your imagination to think about, but wait a minute, this had enormous potency, for the people at the time. And it really, it makes the sense of superstition and magic come alive as you're walking past them and viewing them. So I remember the puppet.
Good. And then the tour later, you get to go see the John Ward house where the puppet was discovered.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I did want to ask you, there's an amazing oil painting on exhibit. And it's large and colorful and very dramatically rendered. And the title of it is The Trial of George Jacobs Sr. for Witchcraft. Could you talk about the subject that's being portrayed in this oil painting and its connection to the ordinary looking walking stick that's in an exhibit case just below it?
Yeah. So this painting is really dramatic, and it draws you in, and it was painted maybe 100 years after the witch trials. But you see the expressions and these dramatic, motions of what people would have been like in the courtroom, which we can only imagine, would have been true given that you were sending your neighbors to their deaths. And we often think that it was only women who were victims of the tragic events of 1692, but it was some men, and some children died. Some people died in prison. This man is an older man, so again, you have that element of it too. This elderly man, George Jacobs, was being accused, and there's a young woman pointing a finger at him, which is believed to be his own granddaughter, accusing him of being a witch. And in the painting, you see a walking stick, and the walking stick is right below him that actually did belong to George Jacobs. So these kind of things, we make the point again and again in the tour, these things actually happened. These were real events. You may hear a lot of stories when you come to Salem in October about vampires and werewolves, and those are a lot of fun. But this is something that actually happened. This is real history. And when you get to see that walking stick that man used to navigate his way along the same streets that we walk today, it is really touching.
Yeah, it's just a powerful painting, because it makes it seem like, yeah, as you were saying, this really happened. There were people actually being accused of being witches. And Power of the Walking Stick, as you read, that Jacobs was accused of using that walking stick to beat people while in spectral form. And again, it just brings home, yeah, there was a kind of a madness at work here, and it's tragic, because lives were at stake. And so that oil painting and the walking stick are two of the things that really stayed with me from the walking tour. They're very powerful.
And that's why we started the tour right there, because we knew that really sets the stage.
It absolutely does. Well, in another gallery, still inside the museum, there are a number of court documents displayed regarding the accused town sisters, the three sisters, whose names are probably the most familiar of the accused to people today. People have heard of Rebecca Nurse, Mary Esty, and Sarah Cloyce. But among the most powerful documents there is a copy of the actual handwritten petition written by Mary Esty, pleading for her own life. Could you talk about that petition and the impact that it had?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say we had two extremely highly successful exhibitions about the Salem Witch Trials in the last few years, and those got us so many people came to see them, and the social media presence of that was just record breaking for the museum. And we were just going, okay, we know that people really want more of this history. So this year, we weren't doing a large exhibition, but we did this pop-up exhibition, which I'm sad to say does come down the end of November, on the Town Sisters. Don't worry, we have things up our sleeve for the future. But so yeah, the petition that you're speaking of is a plea for this woman's life, but more than that, what's so touching about it is I'm paraphrasing, says something like, I know that my appointed time has been set, as almost as if she's making peace with it. It is so unsettling and disturbing and tragic. And then she says, but I hope that you will spare people in the future from this same fate.
Yeah. Yeah, it really brings home the tragedy of it, because as the curator for that damn Libcon, in his audio, he talks about, she knew she was innocent. She absolutely knew that she wasn't a witch. And yet she also knew that she'd been accused, that she'd been on trial, that she was going to be executed. And so it's just poignant to think about the situation. It makes it seem real and human. So it was one of the more impactful points of the exhibit. Well, there were so many. It's like each one is impactful, but they are. Anyway, I thought that was really moving. Well, there's a transition then from the exhibits inside the gallery to a gallery called Salem Stories, and that's where the puppet is that we've talked about already. But there are also exhibits that have to do what at one point gets referred to as witch kitsch, which is a good expression, and how there was a transformation. Salem had been infamous for the witch trials, but found ways to turn Salem into a tourist destination. So tell us about some of the popularized and commercial uses of witch lore.
Yeah, you say there's a transition. Thankfully, this becomes a lighter moment after such a heavy moment in the tour. And then we kind of need this as a little breather. So Salem Stories is an exhibition that takes you from A to Z through the history of the Peabody Essex Museum and the history of Salem, which are completely intertwined. And our curator, Paula Richter, shows us some amazing things there, including it was sort of a 19th century phenomenon to have souvenirs. All of a sudden, there were these entrepreneurs saying, we can make souvenirs and products about witches and sell them. So it didn't just happen in the 1980s when suddenly you could buy all these t-shirts on Essex Street. This actually happened a long time ago. And they made toys. There's a weather vane you can see that you could put on your house that had a witch on it then. And there's also a thing called witch cream, which was supposed to make your skin soft and smooth. And then there's also a piece of sheet music. So this is a 19th century composition. It's a beautiful piece of sheet music that it belongs in our Phillips Library collection. You can see this illustration of like the harbor and moon and people marching along, and it's called the March of the Witches. And we don't think it's ever been played, or not, not ever, but not recently. And so a person on our marketing team is in a band, and she asked her friend to play it on the keyboard. And so you can hear this jaunty little tune as you're looking at the sheet music. They're lovely, this group of young people in this band. They played events for us at the museum. It was so fun to have Henry play this tune for the first time, and we don't know when. And so now it's like one of our favorite things. There's a blog post actually that went up on our blog, the Penn blog, connected today, which will give you the background of that piece of sheet music and playing it.
Yeah, wonderful. The witch kitsch is lots of fun. It's surprising to me, I must say, that witch cream was supposed to make your skin soft. And, that's not the impression, the visual we get of witches for the most part. So it seemed a little contradictory, but hey, at the time, I guess it worked. Well, you see witch tourism all the time in Salem, which has a life of its own, separate from the Salem Witch Trials. Dinah, what do you make of just how popular witch tourism is? Separate from the witch trials, just there's witch shops, there's people you can't go to Salem without seeing people wearing black with their hair dyed and kind of witch paraphernalia, and certainly many witch stores and witch tours. What do you make of just witches being so popular?
Well, I've lived in Salem almost 20 years, so if I haven't made peace with October by now, it's time to officially move to Maine. But I, this year we really, the numbers that everyone is saying is we have nearly 1 million tourists. I was just listening to another podcast where they were saying they think it was, if you look at the end of September to November 1st, it was easily 1 million. So it's a lot, and sometimes they don't know what they're looking for when they come here. They just know we're Halloween town. This idea of witch kitsch and teen history kind of have been at odds with each other over the years, but I think we need to find a way where we just accept that people are coming here for the witch kitsch, and if we can do a little bit of education. Certainly understanding the history is probably easier to do not in November if you want to take a deep dive on it, but it's always going to turn into sort of this fun kind of carnival feel in October. And it's true, there is magic in the cobblestones. When the leaves are falling from the trees and the air turns crisp, there is just something about being in Salem. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have to share that with 1 million people from now on. But obviously, it's good for the economy, and it's just ingrained in who we are. But this really, that's why we also wanted to do the tour, was we have to keep reminding people of the original history.
Yeah, the context for it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess finally, you leave the museum on the walking tour, you go outside, and two of the stops are the Charter Street Cemetery and the Salem Witch Trials Memorial. And could you talk just a little bit about the impact of those stops on the tour?
The Charter Street Cemetery is one of the oldest in the country, so that's just interesting in its own right. There are plenty of notable figures buried there, and people love to see the beautiful engravings on the stones and to wander through that cemetery. It's really interesting that the memorial was put next to it. It took almost 300 years for that memorial to be there, and even for locals, if you go in the morning, and it's extremely powerful, and people are almost year round, almost all the time, leaving flowers and coins on the benches there. There's a bench there for each one of the victims. And something I learned during the tour that I didn't know, that Dan Lipkin says in the tour, is that the way the memorial is positioned, the gravestones of the cemetery are facing away from the memorial, which was done on purpose to symbolize the citizens of Salem turning their backs on these people and letting these tragic events unfold, or even being the perpetrators of these things. So it's it's like there is always something new to learn, and I didn't know that until he pointed that out. And it's an incredibly powerful place to have those two things there together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also on the outside part of the tour, there are stops at the John Ward House, which we mentioned earlier, source of the puppet, and the Witch House on Essex Street. But I'm guessing that the best known destination is what's historically known as the Ropes Mansion. But please tell us about how it's most popularly known today.
Yeah. You could call Halloween 2022 the Hocus Pocus Halloween, since Hocus Pocus 2 came out just in time and was screened on Salem Common and things like that. It was unbelievable. So many costumes of the Sanderson sisters. The Ropes Mansion was featured in the original Hocus Pocus movie as the home of Allison. There was a big party there. You see the kids having a conversation in front of it and going in. We decorated it as it was decorated in the film. We took pictures, from the internet, from how it was, and did that same design. And as we were doing it as a team, interdepartmental, people would come up to us and thank us while we're placing the pumpkins and then start getting their pictures taken. There were lines for people to get their pictures taken in front of it. Hocus Pocus has the hearts of so many people. The Ropes Mansion is available for tours in the the summer and fall, and you can check that out on PEM.org and our website. It has its own amazing story and objects inside.
I'm sure. Um, and, the final stop then, of course, appropriately enough, is the famous Bewitched Statue. And that's where the tour ends up. Dinah, it is, I'll say, I thoroughly enjoyed the tour. You've given a wonderful description of all the different parts of the tour. Was it fun for you to put this together?
It was so much fun. It was sort of just figuring it out as we went along. There were so many people involved. We did photo shoots with all of our curators. Our web development person had to create this whole new format for it. We just figured things out as we went along, and it was really, really fun to do. And we're so glad that the response has been wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I should add that any Wi-Fi enabled device you can use for this. I use my cell phone and it worked just fine. Well, as a final question, Dinah, please tell us how people can gain access to the tour. How can people get more information about it?
The tour is free with museum admission, so you can just walk right in. It's from a QR code. Use your phone. It's best if you do have like a headset or use your Beats headphones or something. You could also just turn the volume down low and do it. There are maps along with it to guide you and directions to get you from point to point throughout. And you can do it at your own pace. If you want to do lunch in between the museum part and the outdoor part, or however you want to take it, you can pause it and do that. All the information is on PEM.org. And so you can find it there. If you live on the other side of the world and you happen to be listening to this, you can also do it from the comfort of your own home and use your imagination.
There you go. All right. Something for everybody. Donna, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the morning show and talk us through the wonderful walking tour. And for anybody who's interested, Dinah has explained, you can get more information on the PEM website. Dinah, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful to talk to you. You made the walking tour come alive for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
That's it for today, everybody. Farewell, and join us next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.